yourself, which will probably be really helpful as well. So I want to make sure that you have that as to get us going. So if you don't mind, I'd love to begin us in prayer just to kind of center myself and hopefully all of us, since I know, like I said, some people are taking work breaks and just kind of pull us together. Heavenly Father, there's so much going on in the world. There's a challenging election, there's race issues, there's online learning for schools. The list just goes on and on and on. Families that are hurting. We have students in our own doc program that are dealing with mental health issues, with surgeries, with too many things on their plate, the balancing act, and we just give it all to you. It's all in your hands, and we just trust that you will guide us and provide us with what is needed. Thank you for this opportunity to get together as a team today and go over some of the important changes that are going on in the doctoral program related to chairing and working as committee members. And I just thank you for each individual that's here today, that they were able to give up this time. And I just pray that all of us are well and continue to be healthy so that we can do the very best we can to support the students in Concordia's doctoral program. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And feel free at any time to ask questions as we go today. Just unmute your mic and just please jump right in if you have a question. I want to just thank you for your leadership and guidance. Those of you who were in the instructor training saw a little bit of this, but there's even some new stuff going on. We just so appreciate all that you've done for our graduates. We have graduates serving as full-time faculty, local universities. Most recently, some of you know Isma. She started off on a part-time research position and became a full-time faculty researcher at a university in Australia, which we just learned of that news this week. We're very excited for her. We have graduates who serve in high-level district office positions as well as school site leaders. Our graduates are writing journal articles. We have one recent graduate who wrote a book and who's getting international recognition for his work. He just did another podcast this weekend with a Canadian radio show. He was on a Canadian podcast a couple weeks ago, and he's slated to speak at a European podcast next week. It's pretty cool. We have a graduate who received a SELPA Principal Award, and we have another graduate who's actually on the Commission on Teacher Credentialing Anti-Bias Race Task Force, and many others. These are just a couple of the wonderful things going on, and it's all because of you and the time that you've given and the time that you've provided in this ministry of our students. So I know that you're aware now that we have launched our new specializations, the Ed Admin, the organizational change, and special ed. Your full-time faculty have been really diligently working and very, very busy getting these new classes up and running. The first new classes will launch for these particular programs in the spring. However, the programs launched in June. So we have cohort 13, we have a blended group, and we have an online group that have already started. And they've been taking the classes where everybody takes together, the leadership classes, the policy class, and then we'll be splitting off into our specializations come spring. So how exciting is that? But we wanted to really focus in, and Dwight's going to jump in at any time here because he knows all of this better than I do. But we wanted to really focus in on the dissertation track management system and to remind you that there are critical documents that you should be looking at as you're guiding your students. Our handbook and our integrated dissertation track handbook have both been recently revised. Some of you may not have seen the revisions that Kat and Dwight did this summer, and then the faculty recently revised the integrated dissertation track. We also have some new requirements. All of the School of Ed has a required structure for papers that across the board in any class, whether you're credential, master's, or doctoral program, students are expected to use that structure. And as you know, we have a required structure for the dissertation, as well as we have some just kind of rough guidelines in terms of a template. And when I use the term template, what I really mean is the PowerPoint background that you're looking at here, that is the template background. And the main purpose when we first developed that template was so students had access to a PowerPoint with the background. And then it kind of morphed into some suggested opportunities. But as we get deeper and deeper with our students who are from Portland, as well as our new students who are online, you know, the template doesn't always mean that every single slide has to be covered. That's up to you as a chair to work with your student to make that happen. We've also condensed the forms, and we're going to be talking about that today as we go through. I just want to remind you that the way the program is set up, students are in phases. And remember that we all come aboard as chairs at that phase 2 point. But especially those of you who are newer at the chair role, please remember that students are still taking classes. And it's really important, if life gets crazy and they're balancing, we need to allow them to focus primarily on their coursework. And sometimes that means the dissertation takes second seat. I have a few right now that are really struggling with the dissertation work, and I've just said to them, just do well in your classes. We'll worry about the dissertation, you know, when you have time. And that's okay, you know, if you have students like that as well. I also have eager beaver students like all the rest of you do who, you know, want to move quickly. But really talk to your students, and it's okay to realize that they are taking courses in addition to the time they're with us. And that's why we say at the beginning, while they're still in courses, that we really should only be meeting with them once a month. And, you know, I know especially for some of you who are newer and you only have like one person, you're thinking, oh, well, I'm going to jump right in and meet every week. But remember, if they're taking classes, you're adding extra pressure by meeting once a week. And that's why we ask that you think about really, you know, looking at if they're still in coursework, to just do once a month. And now I'm not talking about those of you who picked up a student from Portland who's finished with coursework. Obviously, you can set up a schedule that works for you in that time period. But if you really look at your time that's budgeted for you, there's not a lot of hours at that initial phase 2. Most of the hours come a little bit later. Something that has come up, and we want to remind you early on in phase 2, as your candidate starts to write paragraphs and is starting to put together chapter 2, encourage them to put Grammarly right on their computer. It's a free tool, you know, they can go right into the writing studio and download it. And that way you don't have to worry about some of the grammar aspects. And Concordia has the premium version, and it's really nice. I've been using it for my own writing as well. So I would greatly encourage all of you to consider dropping that in. Then as we move into phase 3 and 4, that's where our students are finishing up the coursework, and they are going to need a little bit more of our time. And the faculty had a conversation very recently about faculty time, both adjunct and full-time. And that's where it led us to realizing that maybe we didn't need to have 2 separate defenses. You know, maybe we could have one final defense and tweak the way we do the initial defense. And so before I kind of get into that, I just want to put globally a couple of comments based on phases 3 and 4, and then we'll just dig right into that change. Something to think about is that we need you as chairs to be very specific with your readers and your outside topic experts. Those might be new terms for you. Typically a reader is somebody who's employed by Concordia and has a timesheet. Maybe they're adjunct or full-time, but they actually have a timesheet through Concordia. An outside topic expert is the new term we're using for somebody who we're bringing in for just kind of a one-shot deal to work on that dissertation, and they will get a small stipend for their time. So it's just kind of a way that we're balancing the adjunct role of timesheets and whatnot and the outside topic experts. And it is a legal way that we're able to do this. So what that means is if they have expertise in an area, you might want to tell them to specifically focus on that. So when you send out the paper for the first time, you may say, you know, you're a content expert. If you could really focus on chapter 2. And then if they're more of a methodologist, you could say, hey, you're more of a methodologist. You could really focus on 1 and 3. That way, everybody doesn't have to read all 3 chapters every time it's sent out. So something to think about in terms of, you know, how you use your committee members and how you use each individual to support the role. So as I shared, we have this new procedure and it has tweaked checklist A. So if you are thinking to yourself, oh, I'm not really sure I remember what checklist A is, when you open this PowerPoint, you can click right here. It's hot linked and it'll take you right to checklist A. And after our discussion today, you might want to go back and bookmark that page on your computer so you have access. The first part, all of this black writing has not changed. In a minute, we're going to go here. Oops, I apologize. We're going to go here in a minute and it's all blue writing. That's on purpose because those are all the changes. Okay. So that's why I kind of put a lot on one slide. I don't always like to do that, but that way you can see this piece that's in front of you has not changed. So under the guidance of their chair, we're asking the candidate, you know, they're going to upload Form A. And I have had a couple of questions about dissertation committee selection. So remember, as a chair, you're guiding that process, but Dwight is approving that process. So we still have to fill out the form and Dwight needs to give the final approval for who is actually serving on the committee. And that becomes very, very important, especially now with the regulations of timesheets for adjuncts and whatnot. We have got to make sure that we're right away notifying Kathy, and Deb takes care of this, notifying Kathy if there's somebody who has a timesheet who needs to be, you know, set up so that we are legally in compliance. But most importantly though, as Dwight is, he has the big picture. He's looking at people's weight load. And if all of us are picking a certain committee member all the time to be a methodologist, that person may be weighted down for the time being, and maybe we need to go somewhere else, and he can refer us to different folks. So either he or I or any of the full-time faculty could talk with you at any time about suggestions for committee members. Remember kind of what we've done, the rule of thumb is that there's 2 Concordia folks and then a third person who could be an outsider or it could be a Concordia folk on the committee. So kind of keep that in mind. And then once the committee has been processed, then the student, of course, continues to write and revise those chapters, hopefully checking Grammarly. And then they're submitting that, quote, final draft to you, which I know you're working with them all along, but on paper, it's the final draft. And when you feel that it's about that time, like it's ready to go to committee, this is where there have been some changes. And Dwight, since I've been talking so much up to this point, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Thanks so much. Very informative initial presentation there, Belinda. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Basically, here are the 4 steps that the faculty has agreed upon in terms of how we move forward. Basically, you would still continue to upload the Word document to a designated assignment on the Blackboard so that Deb Baumgartner, our program administrator, can check for safe assignments. So that step's still pretty much in place. Then we do move in another direction though, that we have the document and Form C, assessment of dissertation proposal, that you would send that to the committee members. Then they'll have 2 weeks to review the document along with filling out the Form C and also maybe perhaps making comments directly in the proposal document itself. But we're hoping that that turnaround is within 2 weeks of the time that you would have the students send that to the to the committee. Then the committees would review, the chair would review the comments by committee members with the student of chapters 1 to 3, make changes accordingly, and then eventually send the final form. The chair would be responsible for sending the final Form C based on the committee member comments, and then receive the respective signatures for Form C, and then have the student upload Form C into the Blackboard DTMS system.
So basically, in a nutshell, the change is that there will not be a face-to-face opportunity like there has been in the past, meaning we're doing away with the preliminary comprehensive proposal time. And so it's going to be done in writing. So what that means is you'll have to communicate to your committee when the document is ready for them to actually review it. And as Dwight shared, you would send it out, ask them to fill out Form C. You will collect all of the data on Form C and put it into one Form C that then goes to the student and is uploaded into the DTMS. So a little bit about the background behind that. We felt pretty strongly as a full-time faculty that we want to make sure that it's one voice. And so that's why we're not taking 3 forms. Because at one time we talked about, oh, well, let's just put all 3 forms up on the DTMS. But then there's problems because that means that the student sees the 3 forms and maybe 3 differences in what was scored, and maybe, 3 differences in how deeply things were looked at. And we don't want that to happen. We want you to be able to, as a chair, take everything and put it in one place and present it to the student. And it's up to you whether you make the decision to tell the student that, Dr. Such and Such said this and Dr. Such and Such said that, or if you just want to, pull it together. So it's basically the same rubric. There's a couple of tweaks since it's not a presentation, but it will all be done electronically. And we were hoping to get this piloted. We had a Portland student that Blanca worked with that we thought was going to be able to do this before the time came, but we're right up on October 7th and the person didn't. So we've not piloted this, just so you know. We're jumping right in with, the next students who come up. This is the process. And then the system continues in terms of, again, I put this in black so you can see once they have approval then by committee, you should make sure that they have approval by ROB. What I do is during those 2 weeks or more that committee needs to read, I allow my student to work on the IRB forms during that time so that we can submit that and get approval right away, and then they can jump into their dissertation research. So right there ends checklist A. Once they get to J, then they are moving into checklist B. So I want to stop there for a minute. There's other things I want to share with you, but I'm going to stop for a minute and open up my screen so I can see you and ask if there's any questions, because this is a big change. I want to make sure we're all on board.
A question. Linda, do you see me?
Go ahead.
So a couple things. One, I currently have a student who is scheduled to have an oral defense of her proposal next week, and that's been on the schedule for a few weeks now. So I assume that we can continue on with that, correct?
Dwight?
Yes, that's correct. Either or at this time. We're in transition. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, she's already finished with her PowerPoint, and I just thought it would be best to let her go ahead and do it. So,
okay, absolutely. She has her PowerPoint done. Yeah.
So my other question is, do we have a philosophy of when to submit the IRB application? I mean, sometimes it seems like they're submitted before the proposal is approved by the committee, and sometimes they're not. So, what is our agreement of when to do that? Or
I can tell you my personal philosophy. I do not believe we have an actual philosophy except what's on checklist A. My personal philosophy is write chapters 1, 2, and 3 because all of that information is needed to drop it into the IRB form. And so I have them write chapters 1, 2, and 3 once it's clean and ready and it goes to committee. While committee's reading, then you can work on your IRB. And so by the time we get it back from committee and we've cleaned it up and committee has agreed to chapters 1, 2, and 3, then we're ready to submit IRB and get it approved. That's my personal philosophy. I don't let them submit it early. I do know though, we have had chairs who've had situations where they've submitted it early, but I also know in lots of ways that was because they were driven by COVID or they were driven by school ending or something like that. But if others want to jump in here, please feel free, because that's just personally how I do it.
Yeah, Belinda, I believe how you described how you approached this issue is correct for most of the situations, but as you've identified, there may be some situations that would be where you might have the IRB approval process move in advance of the committee approval.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? I'm curious about your thoughts. Are you okay with this? Are you disappointed? I mean, what do you think about this? It's less time for you guys. You don't have to prep somebody for 2 defenses. So.
I'll pop in. So I'm a brand new chair. I have 2 students, one who just squeezed in under the wire and got to do her proposal defense. But I've been on several committees. So from my perspective, I love the proposal defense because I love to see the difference between the proposal defense and the final defense. I've been on enough committees to see usually a dramatic change, and that's really fun. But I guess I wonder what the actual rationale is, because it sounds like everything's the same. We still, well, except maybe the committee members have to work a little bit harder in reviewing those papers now because they have to really provide a lot more feedback. So maybe shifts work more to the committee members and less to the student.
I wouldn't necessarily say that because hopefully our committee members were working equally as hard at the beginning, but it does take time away from the faculty, meaning you're not having to practice with them. You're not having to get together all, at one time. So part of the design was to allow you more time to work with them individually and less time in the big group. Yeah.
Can I pitch in?
Sure,
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
okay.
Go ahead, Blanca.
All right. Yeah, I was the one who was trying to pilot this with one of my students. And just to share, she was really, we couldn't pilot it because she was waiting for the IRB and she's using CUI students. So if the IRB does not go through, we'll have to make substantial changes. But she was very relieved that she didn't have to do the presentation. She was really happy that she didn't have to go through that.
I admit, I told a couple of mine too, and they felt the same way. Yeah, they were excited not to have to do one more hump. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's something about the anxiety of doing the defense that it was just, oh, great. I'm very, very happy. So she's really happy that she's able to pilot this. So that was just from the perspective of the student. I still haven't seen whether she did the reviews, and I'm still waiting to see the response of the readers to see if they in fact had to take a more investment in the, I want to see that. That's what I'm hoping for, but who knows? I'll let you know.
Yeah. I actually had somebody say to me, hey, it paid to procrastinate. Like they were really excited. They were like, oh, this is great, So
yeah, but yeah, so we'll see.
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, time will tell. We might be here next year changing it back. I don't know. Yeah. Other comments?
Well, just to give kudos out to Dr. Kim for his input in moving us in this direction.
All right.
Eugene, you want to say anything about it?
I think I share the sentiments. You know, and I do want to put in a word for, you know, in regards to what Barbara shared. You know, I think there is a loss here. I think definitely anytime that we, you know, have interaction with students, it's a precious thing we don't want to let go of. And I think this is one of those things where it was a difficult decision, but I think overall there were a lot of reasons why this seemed like it was the right way to go. One, student feedback and the relief and the sort of their emotional state right now, and in general just how they look at this. I myself, just anecdotally, in my doctorate program, I didn't have an oral defense of my proposal, and I know others at different institutions don't either. So it wasn't something that is without precedence. So we were looking at other models and looking at efficiencies. And Barbara, I think you're right. I didn't think about it this way, but my experience with the committee so far has been that they're more careful about reading and applying the rubric to the proposal draft now, which I think is I think a positive. I think I've had committees where it didn't seem like they did any reading at all, and they just sort of showed up and sort of said, "Oh, great job! You're gonna do fantastic! Congratulations!" And that was sort of the extent of their feedback, which is not all that helpful. So I think in many regards, you know, it seems like so far it's going well in terms of how students are experiencing it, as well as how committees are responding as well too. So, and like Belinda said, I think we'll you know, the proof is in the pudding. We'll have to see, you know, a year out how things are.
And Eugene, I think you're bringing up a good point too about the committee, that our role as chairs is to make sure we have the right people at the table. And that's why, you know, if any of us need help, we need to have conversations with each other. Some of you know that how you were selected as chairs is you had expertise in an area that, quite frankly, the full-time faculty may not have. I mean, when we were looking at lists, you know, we saw somebody who had expertise in formative assessment. It's like, why wouldn't we pull that person in when that's her area of expertise? That makes so much sense, you know. So we've been trying to do that, and many of you that are new, that's how you got pulled in, is we knew you had an expertise that, quite frankly, it wasn't our expertise, or it wasn't our primary, you know. And so kind of the same thing we need to be doing as chairs is pulling in those readers and those methodologists who have expertise in the area the student's studying. So we can have conversations about that in a much deeper way if we need to. And Deb Baumgartner's done an amazing job of getting our faculty list on the web updated so that a student could go to that list on the website and really look at expertise. And that may help you too in picking committee members. Other questions or comments about this new checklist A?
I'd like to make a comment. Linda, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm in the car, so I apologize for that, but I am pulled over. I like the idea and I appreciate the idea of having what, Belinda, you just shared, having individual committee members take ownership of the different chapters, and I think that's a fabulous idea. And being able to really go through the dissertation with the rubric, make comments, I think is going to be even more beneficial for the student rather than jotting notes down as they're going through the oral defense of their proposal. So I think that's fantastic. I think a disservice to the students, however, is that opportunity to practice. I think coming forward in that defense of the proposal really gives them the confidence to be able to share their research, but also to fine tune it so that when they get to that final defense, they're able to really shine. But that's just a couple pieces of my opinion. But in addition to that, the IRB I wanted to comment on also. Some school districts, and especially as Dwight had indicated in light of what's going on right now, there are research departments within school districts that have very set deadlines. So in situations where a student must submit their IRB in order to meet that particular deadline, that would be another situation where perhaps the student would be submitting prior to getting final approval from their proposals, chapters 1 through 3. But to support what Belinda had indicated, if there are major changes to the proposal, then obviously having to go back and to submit an addendum for the IRB would be problematic. Just some thoughts.
Thank you. No, I think that's really important. And just so everyone knows, the larger the district, the more likely there's a research department and the more likely that there's more hoops to go through at the district. So keep that in mind. And if you have a question about the district your person's in, feel free to shoot an email and run it by us, because, you know, Eugene, Blanca, Dwight, and I have had experience with many of the districts now, and there are different things that we could recommend, you know, or even give you an example. For example, I just had one go through LAUSD. So if anybody has an LAUSD, actually I've had 2 that just went through LAUSD. So if somebody has LAUSD coming up, you're more than welcome to see those as an example so that you're not spinning your wheels, because they do require some real specific things.
And I think Santa Ana, I just went to, well, I've gone to Santa Ana several times, Santa Ana district, and they require the IRB approval for the site authorization. So you don't get a site authorization, which is kind of a, you know, a problem, because you need that site authorization to get IRB approval.
Right.
So the way.
Anna, doesn't Emily like to talk about it first too?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so what I had to do is write a letter explaining that we could not get the IRB approval unless we have the site authorization. And then that's how I have overcome that problem. But
that's a good
right.
suggestion. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I just ran into that myself with a school district who said that they would not sign it, or even sign it pending IRB approval, you know, and so it was just kind of weird. I think that they could be board policies about that. So that is problematic with getting approval. But the other thing that we could do is to go ahead, you know, and anticipate the school district coming on board and then having to go back with, you know, later on if we can't get it, if the school district won't do it. This school district just simply wouldn't do it. But I just wanted to say, I was going to be quiet about it, but I'm going to say this because I personally am very disappointed about not having an oral defense. Now, I'm a retired person out here and I'm not as busy as the full-time people out there. I know that. But I'm kind of into performance, but one of the things that I have found is that the oral defense sometimes highlights a different aspect of the student that you don't see in the written proposal. Their passion comes through, their ability, and it also forces them to really think through what they are proposing, and you know, to dig deeper than necessarily than in the written form. So you know, I know it's time consuming, and I think with assistance, I think they enjoy it. I think at the end of the day, they feel like they have accomplished, you know, something, a big step. And a doctoral degree is a big deal. It's a big deal. So I'm just sharing that. I mean, I'll go along with the program, you know, and be there with everybody. But I personally think I was disappointed, you know, with losing that. And thanks Dr. Kim for acknowledging that it is a loss, because it is a loss. But you know, we'll move forward.
Absolutely. Paul, go ahead.
First, apologize for the late because we were doing stuff with the school and things like that. So, but I kind of wanted to just reiterate what Debbie shared as well, is that having just been through the program, having that initial defense was very, very helpful going into the final defense for a couple things. Number one it was the first time where I really met the other committee members of my team, right? And so Dr. Swamidas, I would have never met him otherwise, you know. So then when I saw him at the final defense, I was more comfortable speaking to them because I was like, oh, okay, I've seen them before, I've spoken before, I know the kind of questions they're going to ask because these are some of the questions that were very pointedly asked in my initial. And so, you know, it gave me a comfort level when I was doing my final defense, you know. So when I read about the difference, I was like, I can see that there's some benefits, but I can also, again, see that there's going to be some losses there as well, you know, because you know, I'm trying to think of, is there going to be a way to just practice with my candidate just off on the side maybe, or something like that, you know. But
And I would encourage you to practice for the final, of course, because now the final will become an even bigger deal. Yeah, the final will become, you know, and we can even encourage them to practice with their cohort members, you know, like have a practice, a trial run with their cohort members before the real thing. I mean, you know.
I think that's true, but I think that, you know, for example, like I still, you know, vividly, I share it with other people, like when Dr. Swamidas, when I did my preliminary, and all of a sudden he was like, well, you're talking about the shortage of women in engineering and computer science starting from, you know, high school and those different, so why did you start with high school? Yeah. And I was like, well, it's because if I was starting with high school, then I wouldn't get any data for another potentially 12 years before I could write anything, you know. And so, oh, that's a good point. Well, why didn't you start with college students? So I was like, well, because then it'd be 4 years, you know. So, but these were things that also helped me think through, again, like Debbie was saying, you really had to think about why were you doing certain things, and then how were you going to present those things.
Absolutely.
So, but those are questions that I don't think, like a colleague might not think about that kind of thing, because we're all kind of learning the same things together at the same time. We don't have that perspective.
No, you're
so
right.
That's the one thing.
Well, and you know, let's try it out and see how it goes, and let's be creative. There might be times when you need to get all of you together on a Zoom call to quickly go over something, or, you know, we're not saying you can't do that, but, you know, let's try it out and let's be open, and we'll revisit it. Absolutely. I mean, like I said, we may change it back, who knows, but let's give it a go. And then, you know, we'll touch base again at our next meeting in the spring and see, those of you who've had a chance to do it, you know, how it does work. I'll tell you one thing I am probably going to do more of. I had a student right now who she's a big picture girl, and I had a really hard time getting her to realize that she's not where she needs to be. And so, kind of knowing this was coming, I made an executive decision. I decided to send her document to the committee, knowing that it's not ready yet, but knowing that I needed the committee to tell her that. Does that make sense? And so we sent it out. One committee member got back, one picked up the phone and called right away and was like, and I'm like, that's why I need you, you know? And so the good news is I'm able to push her along, but I'm going to go back to the committee, which means admittedly, they're going to have a little, you know, put a little more time into it. I'm going to go back to the committee now that it's past October 7th and said, you know, now we need to really look at this as a written defense. But the good news is they've already given a little feedback. So I'm thinking, as you're all talking, you know, I might spend a little more time doing that, like reaching out earlier than I normally would to committees, depending on the situation on the student, just to get some input and to have some dialogue. So, you know, those are things we can all do. And if you could just keep me posted and keep the full-time faculty posted on what you're doing, that way we can collect evidence and, you know, help us move forward. So this is very valuable to us to hear your input and to kind of get a feel, you know, for what you're thinking. Absolutely. I just want to move on to a couple things, and then we can circle back in terms of a couple other areas, but just a few reminders, because I know life gets in the way and you may not realize this, that our dissertation track management system has been tweaked a little. And from cohort 10 on, thanks to Kat Webb and Dwight, they both were able to help put together one DTMS for cohort 10 and on. So anytime we send out messages to cohort 10 and above, we only have to put it one place. We're still working on a system where we can put Irvine 1 through 9 and Stockton 1 and 2 in the one place. That's why some of you get multiple messages that are the same message. It's because we have to go in DTMS for every single one. So we're still working on that. But just so you know, if you were looking for a form for your specific student, just go to their DTMS. So if it's Irvine 7, just go to Irvine 7 and look under documents, important documents, and it's right there. I recently had to walk one of my students through it, and she hadn't been on the DTMS in a very long time. And when I walked her through it and said, see, there's your handbook, there's your checklist, you know, and it really helped her. So keep that in mind too, because remember, once they leave our seminars and once they leave our classes, you're the primary person who's guiding them. So sometimes they need a little nudge from you to remember where to look. And Deb Baumgartner will be forever grateful if you do that, because that helps them then follow that checklist. The other thing as a reminder is that all of us are required to keep current on our CITI training. So if you are new as a chair, if it's been a while, since you did your own dissertation, you will have to go through the CITI training as well, because when we apply for IRB, we have to provide our certificate as well as the student certificate. So again, right here is a hot link, and you can jump right into my hot link, and it'll take you right to the IRB website where you will download a zip file. The very first file is a handbook with all the forms. The second, Form B, is all the CITI training, and then all the forms needed for IRB. And we have put this same link in the DTMS because we don't want students sharing like forms and IRB from past. We want them to use the most current forms, and the way to do that is to go right to the IRB site. So that information is here, and as you see, whenever I have a hot link, I put it in red this time so you can really jump right into it. I also want to share with you that we are fortunate to have Barbara Howard in the School of Ed, who is our data person, and she recently met with the full-time faculty and shared with us our APLO goals from 1920 and a little update on kind of like how we did. And I wanted to share with you the piece that relates mostly to your work as chairs. What she did is she and her team analyzed 100% of the dissertations that defended in the year 2019. So spring, summer, and fall were all analyzed. And the rubric had the different criterias from all of the chapters as well. In this analysis, it became very clear that overall, our EDD students are very proficient researchers and writers. That was a real warm fuzzy for us to hear as faculty. The highest scoring criteria out of all of those, and remember when I'm talking scoring, I'm talking about the rubric that you and your committee score on each individual student. The highest scoring criteria was actually chapter 4, the results section, which tells me that our research classes, we have 3 research classes, are strong and are helping the students to be able to write, with your guidance, some very good results sections, 91% proficient. Our lowest scoring, though, was chapter 5. And notice only 68 proficient. So that's something for us to really think about. So our final score, 64% received an approve, 32% received approve with minor modifications, and 4% approve with substantial modifications. So that kind of shows you how it breaks out at that final defense and what that looks like. So in some discussions, we said we all collectively need to work on our chapter 5s. So I asked Barbara to give us a list of who are the students that got the 5s. So in front of you, you have a list of the names. And I'm really pleased to tell you that these people all have different chairs, okay? So just when you look at this list, this is a group of people that come, every chair at the time of 2019 is represented. At least one of each chair's persons are here. So that made me feel good. I felt like, okay, this is a good representation. It's not like there's one chair who, you know, it happens to be guiding everybody to get good, strong chapter 5s. I mean, and, you know, when you look at the list, it's not meant for you to say, oh my gosh, those are all the good students. That's not my purpose at all. My purpose at sharing the list is when students ask for examples of a strong chapter 5, I would encourage you to click on this little button here, which goes to the repository, and look for a student who has a similar analysis that they're trying to describe in chapter 5 or a similar study, and say to them, hey, maybe you want to take a look at Ashley Davis's study. She did a mixed methods with a heavy focus on an ethnographic study for her qual. That's what you're doing. She did a good job in writing up her chapter 5. Why don't you take a peek at what she has and see if it might help you in conceptualizing your chapter 5. So keep that in mind. And like I said, it's not meant to say, oh, these are the best of the best. It's just meant to give you suggestions. And I don't recommend sharing this list with with other students. I just recommend us keeping it, you know, in-house, and you would use it for that specific purpose of just looking and saying, okay, here's somebody, you know, that I'd like to share. The other thing, oh, I apologize. The other thing we talked about was just really making sure we have time for chapter 5, because in the discussion, the full-time faculty, we talked about how so many times they're rushed, like they just want to get done. They're just like, let's do it, let's do it, let's do it. And that's part of why the chapter 5 might not be as strong as it could have been, because they just didn't take the time to really do the analysis. So just food for thought in terms of how you approach chapter 5 and giving your student, you know, enough time. And I realized in my own analysis of my own work as a chair, I encourage my students to write outlines for chapters 1, 2, 3, 4. And I've noticed that sometimes I don't do that with chapter 5, and those are my weaker 5s. Like I went back and looked for me personally, you know, what was going on with my weaker students, and the ones that for me were not as strong, I hadn't really guided them properly in my mind. Like I hadn't given them, you know, lay out your outline first, think about your research questions first, think about your analysis first, then write, you know. So food for thought, each of us has to analyze our own way that we coach students in terms of chapter 5. Then a couple more announcements, and then I'll open it back up for questions. Those of you working with Portland, just a reminder that they are not required to do mixed methods. They can do either qual or quan. You know, we're sticking to that. If they had already had their data collected, obviously we don't have to worry about a Concordia IRB. But if they did not have their data collected, they have to go through Concordia's IRB process. And that's just a liability issue. You know, Portland doesn't exist anymore. And so we would be responsible if there was an issue of human subjects. So it's very important that we go through our human subjects situation. So keep that in mind if you're working with a Portland student. And then finally, many of you have seen my smiles in your defense, or maybe not, because sometimes I kept my camera off, so there wasn't a focus on me. But over the past 4 months, I have been calibrating our defenses, just taking a peek at what they look like. And I'm really pleased to tell you that we're really tight in our calibration. I was able to look at from different perspectives, like 11 of the 12 students used the Concordia template. There's only one person when I was watching the defense that did not have the background you're looking at today. They were rogue and used something different, but everybody else used the background. And remember, we do encourage you to use this Concordia background. 12 of the 12 chairs introduced the process. So before you started, you told the group that was there how the process was to work. And I was very pleased to see that. 11 of the 12 were between 20 and 22 minutes. I only had one person that went longer. I was really pleased to see that as well, because we always try to tell students you only have 20 minutes. And then if one of us gives them longer, that's not fair when they start talking and find out, you know. So that was exciting to see that we were right spot on. 11 of the 12 were mixed methods. I think the one that wasn't was Concordia. Oh, I take that back. No, that was a special recommendation that Dwight had had for that student. 12 of 12 had outside visitors. 12 of 12 were online. They were all recorded. 8 of the 12 had proper lighting for chair and committee. So I do want to chat about that in just a minute. 12 of the 12 had proper lighting for the student. 12 of the 12 had higher order questions from their chair, their committee, and their audience. And some chairs called the students, the student with results, and others text them and said, you know, come back into the Zoom room. So people had different ways of like letting them know, which is fine. I mean, I was just so delighted to see how calibrated we were. So my conclusion is that our protocols and routines are standardized. Yay, that's exciting. There's evidence of personalized coaching by chairs. That's what we want. And like we just said, we're going to need it more than ever with these final defenses coming up, since they won't have a preliminary. The higher order questions provided evidence of depth of knowledge of their dissertation. How cool is that? Digital tools were used successfully. People weren't fumbling with their technology, which is very exciting. Just little suggestions. I would say, you know, let's make sure we do advise our students to use the Concordia background, that faculty need to evaluate their online lighting for their workstations. And, you know, hey, let's keep up the good work. That's really, really important. So I'm going to talk about that lighting in just a minute. But I want to tell you one more thing before I open it back up and take us off my share. The alumni event is coming up on Sunday, the 25th, 11 o'clock. You'll be getting more information, but I hope it's already on your calendar. We're going to be outside this year wearing masks. And if you would like to purchase food at the cafe, there'll be that option as well. So hopefully you have that on your calendar. The students who've graduated love to see the faculty. So if you're able to come, we'd love to see you there. That's the annual event that happens the last Sunday in October every year. This is the 3rd annual event. So with that, I'm going to stop for a minute and come back here. And I just want to show you. So I have a light right here, and I just made it a little bit better by turning it off. And notice how its side light, it starts to pop me. So I should be looking at this ahead of time and saying, okay, you know, how can I focus in? Also thinking about where you are with a computer, like some of them were like this with their computers, some of the chairs, and I was looking at their noses or the committees instead of like, see how here, you know, just kind of focusing in. And I'm not going to stand up, but I have an overhead light that I had to move in front of me at the direction of John Randall when I first got my training for online instruction, because I was very dark at first. Like my desk, I had turned this direction in my home, and see how it shades part of my face. So I would encourage you to play around with your workstation area and think about ways that will benefit. And, you know, I get it when there's sometimes when you're just jumping on for a quick Zoom with a student, I don't think you have to worry. But when we're in a defense and we're being recorded, I think we should pay attention. I think it's really important to really make that all of us, the chairs, need to look very professional. So. All right, I've talked a lot at you. What questions are popping up?
Can I just share a comment about the Portland students?
Yeah.
Okay, I just following up on what you were saying. If you are working with a Portland student who had already some of their work completed, something I've noticed, and you probably have too, is that they weren't required to have a theoretical framework. So when you're working on the rubric, they were not required to have that. They also were not required to, sort of like the structure of their dissertation is gonna look different from ours. I think they placed problem statement in chapter 2 and so on. So just what I'm doing is filling out the rubric with just whatever I find it as soon as I find it, as long as I find it.
Hmm.
So I don't penalize them for not having it in the same order that we require it. Especially with the theoretical framework is very, very different. They use something that is called conceptual framework and is written in chapter 2. So
That's
I,
right.
I don't know if you want to say something about how to proceed with
And I'm glad you brought that up, Blanca, because I did have a chair ask me the difference between a conceptual framework and a theoretical, and they are different. So I'm glad you brought it up. And you have to make the decision whether you want to encourage them to go back and center their research on a theoretical framework, or if you want to leave the conceptual framework as was stated in chapter 2 and just kind of sub it on your rubric. Just cross out the word theoretical and just put conceptual, and that way everybody knows. Yeah, so that's a really good point. Yeah, and remember, the rubric's just a guide. It's, everything on there doesn't have to be there. It's meant to be a guide for scoring and for supporting students.
And also in terms of the titles or whatever order there may be within the dissertation itself, that really is the discretion of the chair and the committee, as well as the doctoral candidate. So there is flexibility there for you. What best conveys the information to the reader.
Yeah. Good point. All right, hearing none, I'm going to go on. For those of you who are working as adjuncts, Dwight, do you want to take over?
Just very quickly, I think most of you have already seen some of this information. A few may not, but basically we're now moving towards timesheets for our adjuncts. And here are some general guidelines, and please feel free to work with me if you need to have additional budgeted hours. And that's all very much flexible in terms of your workload. So the budgeted hours, some general guidelines, don't work any more than 4 hours, 59 minutes without taking a meal break. No more than 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, and no more than 6 days in a 7-day period is what we're recommending and really would like you to adhere to. Get advance approval from me if you do need to go beyond the budgeted hours, and we can work with you on that. And then remember to enter your time today for this learning session. Back to you, Belinda.
Did you want to go over the financial compensation?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't see that slide. Thank you. So basically, the budgeted hours are basically as much as 90 hours in total. We figure the 30 budgeted hours would take place over the 6 terms from term 5 through term 10. So it's about 5 hours per term, and that would include where you would possibly meet with each of your students twice in a term. And then the compensation is broken out by what we've used in the past, the $1,400 per unit, and that's how the breakout is for total compensation.
So we understand that it's not very much, and we just really appreciate you and thank you for joining us in this ministry. And we know that it's your servant leadership that's allowing us to be as successful as we are. And we know that it's your servant leadership that's assisting us as we grow. And our retention is amazing. I mean, when you look at our program retention compared to other programs across the country, we are doing in the top 5% of doctoral programs across the country in our retention. And it really is the personalized attention that's given at different phases in the program. And this is one of them. So thanks, guys. We really appreciate you. So I'll stay on until the last question is answered, but I know some of you, this was your lunch break, so I get it that you need to zip off right away. But thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you so much.
Hi, Deb. Hey, Dr. Doring. Hi, Linda.
Hi, Paul.
We're glad you're here.
Yeah, sorry I was late because we were having lunch.
Yes.
It's so crazy
Before
right
you
now.
continue, Paul, Belinda, would you want to turn off the recording?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, thank you so much.